You know that feeling when the lights flicker during a storm and for a split second your heart skips a beat? Well, imagine that feeling stretching out for hours. That's where my story begins. It was a Tuesday evening, unremarkable in every way, until the sky decided to put on a light show that would make Vegas jealous. I was home alone, my partner away on a business trip, leaving me to fend for myself in our suburban fortress. As the wind howled and rain lashed against the windows, I settled in for a cozy night of binge-watching my latest obsession. Then it happened. A flash of lightning so bright it seemed to sear my retinas, followed by a thunderclap that shook the house to its foundations. And just like that, darkness engulfed me. At first, I wasn't too concerned. Power outages were par for the course during storms like this. I fumbled around for my phone, using its feeble light to navigate to the kitchen drawer, where we kept the emergency flashlight. As I rummaged through the drawer, my fingers brushed against something unexpected. A piece of paper that definitely hadn't been there before. Curious, I pulled it out and shone my phone's light on it. My blood ran cold as I read the hastily scrawled message. "I've been waiting for this moment. See you soon." I dropped the paper as if it had burned me, my mind racing. Was this some kind of sick joke? Had my partner left it as a prank before leaving? But no, that wasn't their style at all. A creak from upstairs made me freeze. In the silence that followed the power outage, every little sound seemed amplified. I held my breath, straining my ears. There it was again, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My heart pounding, I grabbed the largest knife from the block on the counter. The weight of it in my hand was both reassuring and terrifying. I'd never had to use a weapon before, and the thought that I might have to now made me feel sick. I crept towards the stairs, each step feeling like an eternity. The flashlight beam danced erratically, my shaking hands unable to keep it steady. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, another flash of lightning illuminated the hallway above. And there, at the top of the stairs, I saw a silhouette. Just for a split second. But it was enough to send me stumbling backward. A scream caught in my throat. I ran to the front door, fumbling with the locks. But as I yanked it open, ready to flee into the storm, I hesitated. What if this was exactly what they wanted? To drive me out of the relative safety of my home and into the open where I'd be even more vulnerable. Conflicted and terrified, I slammed the door shut again, sliding down against it as my legs gave way. I sat there, knife clutched to my chest, ears straining for any sound of movement. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, an eerie calm had settled. No more footsteps. No creaking floorboards. Had I imagined it all? Gathering what little courage I had left, I decided to investigate. I crept up the stairs, my free hand trailing along the wall for support. At the top, I paused, listening intently. Nothing. I checked each room methodically, my heart racing with every door I opened. But each one was empty, undisturbed. By the time I reached the last room, our bedroom, I was almost convinced I'd let my imagination run wild. As I pushed open the bedroom door, a gust of wind made me jump. The window was open, curtains billowing in the stormy air. I rushed over to close it, puzzled. I was sure I'd shut all the windows before the storm hit. That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. On the windowsill, barely visible in the dim light, was a muddy footprint. I backed away, my mind reeling. Someone had been here. Someone had been in our house, in our bedroom, and they might still be here. A noise from downstairs snapped me out of my paralysis. It sounded like the front door opening. I held my breath, listening intently. Yes, there it was again, the distinct sound of the door closing, followed by footsteps. My mind raced through my options. I could try to hide, but where? The closet? Under the bed? Both seemed like terrible ideas straight out of a horror movie. I could try to escape through the window, but in this storm, that seemed like a death wish. The footsteps were getting closer now, slowly ascending the stairs. Each creak of the floorboards sent a fresh wave of terror through me. In a moment of desperate inspiration, I ducked behind the bedroom door, pressing myself against the wall. The knife trembled in my sweaty grip as I waited, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs, pausing for a moment before continuing down the hallway. Closer and closer they came, until finally, they stopped right outside the bedroom. I could hear heavy breathing on the other side of the door. My own breath caught in my throat as I watched the doorknob slowly turn. The door swung open, and a beam of light swept across the room. I pressed myself harder against the wall, praying I wouldn't be seen. The intruder stepped into the room, their back to me. In the dim light from their flashlight, I could make out a tall figure dressed in dark clothing. It was now or never. With a cry that was part terror and part rage, I lunged forward, bringing the knife down in a wild arc. But my attack met only air. The figure had moved with inhuman speed, sidestepping my clumsy assault effortlessly. I stumbled, off balance, and felt a strong hand grab my wrist, twisting until I dropped the knife. Another hand clamped over my mouth, stifling my scream. "Shh!" A familiar voice whispered in my ear. "It's me." The hands released me, and I spun around, my eyes wide with disbelief. There, illuminated by the flashlight now on the floor, stood my partner. "What? How? I thought you were on a business trip." I sputtered, relief and confusion warring within me. They smiled sheepishly. "I wanted to surprise you. I got home early and saw the power was out, so I thought I'd sneak in and scare you a little. I didn't realize how badly I'd frighten you. I'm so sorry." I sagged against them, the adrenaline draining from my body, leaving me weak and shaky. "But the note in the kitchen? The footprint on the windowsill?" Their brow furrowed in confusion. What note? And what footprint? A chill ran down my spine as I realized the implications of their words. If they hadn't left the note or come through the window, then who? A creak from the hallway made us both turn. There, framed in the doorway, stood a figure. Not my partner, who was right beside me, but someone else. Someone whose face was hidden in shadow, but whose smile gleamed wickedly in the darkness. "I told you I'd see you soon," the figure said, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to suck all warmth from the room. My partner moved to stand between me and the intruder, but with a speed that defied belief, the figure was suddenly right in front of us. A hand shot out, grabbing my partner by the throat and lifting them off the ground with inhuman strength. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat as I watched helplessly. The figure turned its head towards me, and in the faint light, I caught a glimpse of its face, or rather, where its face should have been. There was nothing there but a swirling darkness, a void that seemed to pull at my very soul. "Thank you for the invitation," it said, its voice now a chorus of whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "It's so much easier when you're afraid. Fear opens doors that should stay closed." As it spoke, I felt a tugging sensation, as if something essential was being drawn out of me. My vision began to blur, the edges of reality seeming to waver and distort. The last thing I saw, before consciousness slipped away, was the figure releasing my partner, who crumpled to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. Then the darkness that had been its face seemed to expand, engulfing everything in its path. As I felt myself being pulled into that infinite void, a final, terrifying thought flashed through my mind. This was no mere home invasion. We had invited something far worse into our lives, something that had been waiting in the shadows all along, feeding on our fears and growing stronger. And now, as the last vestiges of light faded away, I realized that the true horror wasn't the darkness itself, but what lurked within it, waiting, watching, and hungry for more. I've always considered myself a rational person, not one to be easily spooked by shadows or bumps in the night. But there's something about a thunderstorm that can make even the most level-headed individual a bit jumpy. Tonight was no exception. It had been raining for hours, a relentless downpour that seemed determined to wash away the very foundations of our quiet suburban neighborhood. I sat in my favorite armchair, a worn leather piece that had seen better days, facing the large bay window that overlooked our front yard. The rhythmic patter of raindrops against the glass was oddly soothing, almost hypnotic. A flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows across the walls. I counted silently, waiting for the inevitable rumble of thunder. 1, 2, 3. The boom that followed was so loud it made me flinch, nearly spilling my mug of chamomile tea. As the echo of thunder faded, I noticed something peculiar. There, at the edge of my yard, where the neatly trimmed grass met the sidewalk, stood a figure. It was barely visible in the gloom, a darker shadow against the night. I blinked, certain my eyes were playing tricks on me. Another flash of lightning, and the figure was gone. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Just my imagination, I told myself, taking a sip of tea to calm my nerves. But then I saw it again. This time, it was closer to the house, standing motionless beneath the old oak tree. My heart began to race, its frantic rhythm drowning out the sound of the rain. I set my mug down with trembling hands, my eyes never leaving the sinister silhouette. Who was this mysterious intruder? What did they want? The questions swirled in my mind, each more unsettling than the last. I reached for my phone, ready to call the police, when another flash of lightning revealed nothing. The figure had vanished once more. I laughed nervously, chiding myself for being so easily frightened. It was probably just a neighbor, I reasoned, out for a late-night stroll despite the storm. But even as I tried to convince myself of this logical explanation, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. The wind picked up, howling through the trees and rattling the windows. I pulled my cardigan tighter around me, suddenly feeling chilled to the bone. As I reached for my tea, movement caught my eye. The figure was back, and it was waving at me. I froze, my mug halfway to my lips. The silhouette's arm moved back and forth in a slow, deliberate motion. It was unmistakably a wave, but there was something off about it. The movement was too fluid, too smooth to be natural. It was as if the figure was underwater, its gestures slowed and distorted by an invisible current. A crack of thunder made me jump, and I knocked over my mug, spilling tea across the hardwood floor. I cursed under my breath, grabbing a nearby throw pillow to mop up the mess. When I looked back up, the figure was gone again. My hands shook as I cleaned up the spill, my mind racing. Was I losing it? Had the isolation of the past few months finally gotten to me? I'd always prided myself on my strong grip on reality, but now I found myself questioning everything. I decided I needed a distraction. I turned on the TV, flipping through channels until I found a mindless reality show. The inane chatter of the contestants was a welcome respite from the storm and my own troubled thoughts. As I settled back into my chair, a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made me tense. Slowly, I turned my head towards the window. The figure was there, closer than ever before. It stood just beyond the porch steps, its featureless face turned towards me. I let out a strangled gasp, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The figure didn't move, didn't react to my obvious distress. It just stood there, watching. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of illumination, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The figure had no face. Where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only smooth, featureless darkness. I scrambled out of my chair, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste to get away from the window. I ran to the front door, my trembling hands fumbling with the locks. I had to make sure it was secure, had to keep that thing out. As I engaged the deadbolt, a sound from behind me made me freeze. It was a soft, wet noise, like bare feet on tile. I turned slowly, dreading what I might see. The living room was empty. The TV still blared, the contestants' laughter now seeming mocking and cruel. I let out a shaky breath, relief washing over me. But then I saw it, a trail of wet footprints leading from the window to where I stood. I screamed, the sound tearing from my throat before I could stop it. I ran upstairs, taking the steps two at a time, my only thought to put as much distance between myself and whatever had entered my home as possible. I slammed my bedroom door shut, leaning against it as I gasped for breath. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, a nightmare brought on by too much late-night TV and an overactive imagination. A soft knock on the door behind me shattered that comforting illusion. I whirled around, staring at the door in horror. The knock came again, gentle but insistent. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No answer came, only another knock. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting around the room for something, anything I could use as a weapon. My gaze fell on the heavy lamp on my bedside table. I unplugged it with shaking hands, hefting its weight. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, agonizingly slowly. I raised the lamp, ready to swing at whatever came through that door. The door creaked open, revealing nothing. The hallway beyond was empty and dark. I lowered the lamp slightly, confusion mingling with my fear. Then I felt it. A presence behind me. A chill that ran down my spine and made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Slowly, I turned around. The figure stood there, in my bedroom, mere inches away from me. Up close, I could see that what I had mistaken for shadows was actually a writhing mass of darkness, constantly shifting and changing. Where its face should have been, there was only a swirling void. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure raised a hand, its fingers elongating into razor-sharp claws. As it reached for me, I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end. But the pain I expected never came. Instead, I felt a gentle touch on my forehead. My eyes flew open in surprise. The figure was gone. In its place stood me, an exact replica, down to the terrified expression on my face. I stared in disbelief, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. The other me smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was predatory, full of malice. When it spoke, its voice was my own, but distorted, as if coming from underwater. "Thank you for letting me in," it said. "I've been waiting so long for this moment." I watched in horror as my doppelganger's form began to shift and change, becoming more solid, more real. At the same time, I felt myself fading, becoming insubstantial. "What's happening?" I tried to ask, but my voice was barely a whisper. "I'm taking your place," my double answered, its smile widening to reveal rows of sharp teeth. "You invited me in, and now I get to live your life. Don't worry, I'll take good care of everything and everyone." As it spoke those final words, images flashed through my mind. My friends, my family, all the people I cared about. They would have no idea that the person they thought was me was actually this creature. I tried to move, to fight back, but I was powerless. I could only watch as my body became transparent, fading away like mist in the morning sun. The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was my own face, twisted into an expression of cruel triumph. In that moment, I understood the true horror of what had happened. The shadowy yard stalker hadn't just been watching me. It had been waiting for an invitation, a moment of weakness when I would let my guard down. And I had given it exactly what it wanted. As my consciousness slipped away, I heard the storm outside begin to subside. The rain slowed to a gentle patter, and in the distance, birds began to sing, heralding the approach of dawn. Life would go on as normal for everyone else. But for me, there would be only darkness, and the knowledge that somewhere out there, wearing my face and living my life, was a monster of my own making. I've always considered myself a night owl. That's why I took this job as a late-night delivery driver. The quiet roads, the stillness of the world after dark, it suited me. But let me tell you, there's a difference between embracing the night and feeling like the night is trying to swallow you whole. It was a Friday evening when things started to get weird. The weather had been threatening all day, dark clouds looming on the horizon like some ominous harbinger. By the time I started my shift, the sky had opened up, unleashing a deluge that turned the world into a watery blur. I'd been on this rural route for about 6 months now, and I prided myself on knowing every twist and turn of these back roads. But tonight, with the rain coming down in sheets and lightning illuminating the landscape in brief, terrifying flashes, everything looked different, unfamiliar, threatening. My first few deliveries went smoothly enough, despite the weather. I'd pull up to a house, dash through the rain to drop off the package, and hurry back to the relative safety of my van. But as I made my way deeper into the countryside, a sense of unease began to creep over me. It started with a car, a dark sedan that I noticed in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, these roads might be rural, but they weren't deserted. But after the third or fourth time I spotted it behind me, always maintaining the same distance, alarm bells started ringing in my head. I tried to shake it off. Paranoia, I told myself. Just the weather and the isolation getting to me. But then I noticed something else. At each house I delivered to, there was a light on in one of the windows. Always the same window, the one closest to where I'd parked my van. And each time, just as I was about to turn away, I'd catch a glimpse of movement behind the curtain, a shadow quickly retreating. My heart was pounding now, my palms slick with sweat as I gripped the steering wheel. I found myself checking the rearview mirror obsessively, looking for that dark sedan. Sometimes it was there, sometimes it wasn't. but I could never shake the feeling of being watched. As I pulled up to my next delivery, a particularly isolated farmhouse set back from the road, a flash of lightning illuminated something that made my blood run cold. There, in the field adjacent to the house, was a figure. Just standing there in the pouring rain, facing my van. I blinked, and in the next flash, it was gone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grab the package. I considered just leaving it in the van, marking it as undeliverable. But some stubborn part of me, the part that took pride in always completing my route, pushed me forward. I stepped out into the rain, the wind immediately threatening to knock me off my feet. As I struggled towards the porch, another flash of lightning revealed the figure again, closer this time. I let out an involuntary yelp, nearly dropping the package as I scrambled up the porch steps. Just as I was about to set the package down, the porch light flickered on. I jumped, spinning around to face the door. An elderly woman stood there, peering out at me through the storm door. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I've been waiting for this package all day. Would you mind bringing it inside for me? I'm afraid I'm not as steady on my feet as I used to be." Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run back to my van. But the pleading look in the old woman's eyes, combined with my ingrained customer service mentality, overrode my fear. I nodded, following her into the house. The interior was warm and cozy, a stark contrast to the raging storm outside. The old woman led me to a small table near the door, where I set down the package. "Thank you so much, dear," she said, smiling warmly. "Would you like a cup of tea before you go back out into that awful weather?" I was about to politely decline when a loud crash of thunder made me jump. The lights flickered ominously. "Maybe just a quick cup," I found myself saying. The old woman's smile widened as she shuffled off to the kitchen. I stood awkwardly in the entryway, my wet clothes dripping onto the hardwood floor. My eyes darted nervously to the windows, half expecting to see that mysterious figure pressed against the glass. "Here we are," the old woman's voice startled me out of my anxious reverie. She was holding out a steaming mug of tea. I took it gratefully, the warmth seeping into my cold hands. As I raised it to my lips, a flicker of movement caught my eye. There, reflected in the surface of the tea, was a face. Not mine, not the old woman's, but something else. Something with eyes as black as the storm-darkened sky and a mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin. I dropped the mug, tea splashing across the floor as I stumbled backward. The old woman's concerned face swam into view. "Oh dear, are you all right?" I mumbled an apology, my eyes darting around the room. Everything looked normal, but the feeling of wrongness persisted. I should go," I stammered. "Thank you for the tea, but I have more deliveries to make." The old woman's expression changed then, her concern morphing into something colder. "Are you sure you wouldn't like to stay a bit longer? The storm is only getting worse." As if to emphasize her point, another crash of thunder shook the house. But this time it was accompanied by a sound that didn't belong, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I backed towards the door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The old woman took a step towards me, her movements suddenly fluid and predatory. "You really shouldn't go out there," she said, her voice deepening, distorting. "It's not safe." I fumbled for the doorknob, my eyes never leaving her face. As I watched in horror, her features began to shift and change, melting like wax under a flame. Her kindly smile stretched wider and wider, revealing row upon row of needle-sharp teeth. I wrenched the door open and bolted into the storm. The rain lashed at my face as I ran, my feet slipping in the mud. I could hear something behind me, a sound like dozens of feet scrabbling across the ground. I reached my van, yanking the door open and throwing myself inside. As I fumbled with the keys, a shape slammed into the driver's side window. I screamed, the sound torn from my throat as I stared into a face that was no longer human, if it ever had been. The engine roared to life, and I stomped on the accelerator. The van fishtailed on the wet road, but I managed to keep control, speeding away from the farmhouse and the horrors it contained. As I drove, my mind raced. What had I just experienced? Was any of it real, or had I finally cracked under the pressure of my isolating job? It wasn't until I reached the main road that I allowed myself to relax slightly. The storm was beginning to subside, the rain lessening to a gentle patter. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to calm my frayed nerves. That's when I noticed the package on the passenger seat, the one I was supposed to have delivered to the old woman. Except, I didn't remember bringing it back to the van. With trembling hands, I reached for it. The label had been partially torn off, obscuring the address. But there in the corner was a name. My name. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the truth. The isolated houses, the watching eyes, the mysterious figure in the rain, it had all been leading to this moment. I wasn't the delivery driver. I was the delivery. As this realization sank in, I caught a glimpse of movement in my rearview mirror. The dark sedan was back, closer than ever. And in the driver's seat sat a figure with a too-wide smile and eyes as black as the storm-darkened sky. I pressed down on the accelerator, but I knew it was too late. Whatever game this was, I had already lost. The true horror wasn't the storm, or the isolated route, or even the monstrous beings I had encountered. It was the knowledge that I had been a pawn all along, unknowingly delivering myself into the hands of something beyond my comprehension. As the sedan drew closer, its headlights casting long shadows across the road, I couldn't help but wonder how many other drivers had fallen into this trap. And more chillingly, how many more would follow? The last thing I saw before the sedan rammed into the back of my van was my own reflection in the rearview mirror. And for a split second, I could have sworn I saw my face begin to change, a too-wide smile spreading across my features as my eyes turned black as night.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.